I love teaching here at the University of Oregon. I love classes that allow for more discussion that are, I teach large lecture courses of 150 students, but I also teach smaller courses anywhere from seminar of 15 students to a more intermediate sized class of 40 or 50 students. And anything less than 50, we're able to have a more discussion-oriented class. And I tend to enjoy those more, and students, it seems, also seem to enjoy that. So I'm very glad and really appreciative of how you all have contributed to making this environment one that's not only safe, as some of you shared, safe, enjoyable, but rewarding in terms of learning from one another as much as you might from me or from the materials that are presented by the course. And in that context, one of the important skills, especially if you are in the helping professions, especially if you are aspiring or already in something related to family human services or anything that has, in the religious context, some ministerial dimension, which is the ability to listen. And oftentimes, the ability to listen as well as to speak skillfully and appropriately is key. And I don't think that we could have had the conversation that we did last week unless you were good listeners. It's because you're good listeners that we're all able to allow the key points, the subtle points, the complicated points to emerge. And some of you shared that in your impressions of last week as we went around, that in the small group or in the larger group, that you had a conversation partner or you had conversations with people who have very different backgrounds or perspectives from your own. And some of you shared that can even be personally or emotionally challenging because we're touching on subject matter that runs very deep in our lives. And yet, you were able to find that meaningful, significant, enriching. And that's a very high level of skill in terms of the overall learning process, what it means to learn as a human being. And especially when it involves a subject matter like religion, if you look at the history of human civilization, 99% or greater percentage of human conflict has either been fought in the name of religion or has invoked religion. And if you look at how civil or reasonable conversation and discourse about religion has evolved, you can look at certain historical markers. 1893, Chicago, the first World Parliament of Religions, where different religions from around the world gathered for the first time explicitly for the purpose of sharing and appreciating religious diversity instead of primarily for the purpose of conversion and conquest. But if you actually read the transcripts of papers presented in 1893 and the viewpoints that people wanted to share, there's a huge amount in which people wanted to say, yes, we appreciate all religions are great, but ours is the greatest after all. And it's quite clear that's the case. And I wouldn't fault them in that time, because for that time, representatives of different religions and philosophies and so forth, that was a huge step to make, to say we should appreciate all different religious, spiritual, philosophical perspectives. Forward another century, 1993, the next World Parliament of Religions held in Chicago. Same purpose, but now far advanced in terms of sophistication in appreciating human religious experience, the diversity of it, the spiritual dimension of it, and so on and so forth. But still, reading through a lot of these papers, they're still subtle, but unmistakable sense. Yes, you have very sophisticated understanding. I want to learn what you're about. But let me tell you what is truly profound. It's very difficult to get out of the perspective that I have, that's closest to home, is what I feel is the greatest. And as an antidote to that, sometimes when I have a teaching course that's related to religious studies and so forth, I sometimes say to students, isn't it interesting? Of course, people often adopt religious perspectives that are quite different from what they were born into. But at the same time, a huge percentage of people around the world who have a religious orientation feel that, their religious perspective is really the best one, not just for themselves, but potentially to share with others. And isn't it an interesting fact that such a large percentage of people are so lucky to have been born into the best religion in the world? So, by nature, of course, everything that's close to home, especially things that we've had positive experiences with, we're going to feel most positive towards. But it also shows that it's very difficult to really move beyond that, to really drop the story, and to really see, hear, feel the person who is before me, and therefore to be able to try to understand what is the most helpful way that I can relate to this person, what is the most helpful way that I can understand this person, what is the most helpful thing that I can do. In my work in the field of Buddhism psychotherapy, I've been fortunate to be part of a group of scholars and colleges and universities that we have organized a series of international conferences on the topic. And we have scholars, we also have practitioners, psychiatrists, psychotherapists, counselors, also religious teachers, people who are leaders in their own religious community, Buddhist community, and we also had outside people outside of Buddhism join the conversation from Christian background, Jewish background, so forth. These are people, especially since a number of them are world class, they're internationally known. I thought this is going to be really, really good, because these are people who are considered the top experts in their field at listening. I wanted these people to see the conversation that some of my own students had in my classes, and I would say also this class last week, on skillful listening and being open to being challenged by taking seriously the deep commitments that people have that's different from their own. So even people who are the experts at the art of listening, are supposed to be, often have a hard time listening to one another. Certainly, I count myself as one of those who needs to learn that skill better. My wife has a nickname for me. She speaks Japanese. She's fluent in both, but she was born and raised in Japan. And so she has a Japanese nickname for me. It's Hariko no Tora, Hariko no Tora. And this is a traditional Japanese toy. Tora means tiger. And Hariko, it's a paper mache sculpture. So this is a paper mache tiger. And the characteristic of this paper mache tiger is that the body is in one piece, the head is an articulating head that's usually hung on a string, and it bobs up and down. So do you know why she calls me paper mache tiger with a bobbing head? Because when we're at dinner, she's talking, and I'm going like this. And she says to me, "What did I just say?" And I go, and usually I could repeat the last 3 words that she said. She says, "See, you're not listening." So I myself have a great deal to learn in terms of listening. But I think that you all did an excellent job listening to one another. And without that, the points, the very articulate points that were being made by many of you wouldn't have had the audience that drew those insights out. And I think it can continue to help us in our discussion if you are aware of that factor. That if you tend to be someone who is very articulate and presenting a lot of points, but then you may feel, well, what do others have to say about it? Maybe I want to stand back a little bit and now work on my listening skill. Or some of you may feel, I really love to listen and learn, and I know that's good, but really there are going to be times if I work in this field where I really need to speak up. So I may be a little bit more on the shy side or introverted side, but maybe if there's an opportunity, I'll raise my hand and maybe I can share a thought. So whatever you have to say, there's nothing that's meaningless. Everything has value. If you have a question, probably many other people in the class have that question. If you have points to make, I think probably other people have a similar point of view that they would like to share, that you should share that. But it goes even subtler than that as this course progresses, long after I'm gone and this course goes on, that you will start to observe one another and begin to see how other people are in this rhythm of speaking, listening, of being proactive, of being receptive. So these are some of the thoughts that came to me as I enjoyed last week's class. Religion can function positively or negatively in a person's life depending on many factors: background, cultural factors, life experiences, and specific situations. And it can be as important for a person in a helping profession or family human services to become aware of how one's own exposure to and background in religion and spirituality might frame or influence how one approaches one's work or to in one's relationship to a particular client, as it is to learn more about the client's own religious background. So what is the interaction between my own religious, philosophical assumptions and the background of the person I'm working with? And one can draw on one's own spirituality or religious background as a resource to help other people. But depending on the particular context and particular interaction, this could be helpful or unhelpful. So self-knowledge in the professional sense may be as significant as objective knowledge. And one way to maximize effectiveness in the helping professions is to truly listen to and to see the client as a person. And one way to effect this is, as we discussed and Dan reiterated, is to drop the story of whatever one might think the client is or should be, as well as the story of who I think I am or should be. So I just want to just stop for a moment, and if you have any comments or thoughts before I go on to just review a few points in Chinese religion and go on to Buddhism. Does anybody want to share any thoughts along these lines right now? You don't have to. But if you have something you want to share.
Any small, tangible next steps one might take in order to drop the story?
Yes, so good. So I just want to try an experiment. So we're all going to sit together silently. And I just want you to feel the rhythm in the room. Just feel the rhythm in the room. Just look around a little bit. And just allow yourself to take in the people in the room and get a sense of, each person. Each person. And you can get a sense of your own sort of feeling. Some of you might feel a little bit of anxiousness. Oh my gosh, we're not talking. Some of you might feel like, oh, that's kind of interesting. There is a kind of energy here. Some of you are going to notice the physical things more. The lighting's okay, but it's a little artificial. Some of you are going to be more logically engaged. This is an interesting exercise, but where will this take us? And how can I fit this into the conversation we have? This is very interesting, isn't it? Because there are different ways of knowing. Knowing emotionally, sensing perceptually, intuiting, thinking logically. And they're not mutually exclusive. You might be doing one or more at the same time or alternately, but you get a feel of it. Now, I want to take that a little bit further. Just want to stop for a moment and just take a breath. As you look around the room, as you feel the rhythm of the room in your own way to class, you can see, you can feel what I've been talking about. We're in a culture, there are different cultures, different orientations, different degrees. We're in a culture that's very, very talkative for some very good reasons. So some of us, not all of us, but some of us are a little bit uncomfortable when we're not speaking. And when that happens, we get a little bit nervous about ourselves. That makes it a little bit more difficult to actually just pay attention to the person who's before us, right? But if you understand that, then you begin to realize, actually, that happens a lot. Somebody comes, it could be just a friend, and they want to talk to you about a problem, but you sense that they're having a problem. And deep down inside, you might be willing to listen, but your nervousness starts to make you talk. It makes it difficult just to listen, just to draw to the story. I remember in another capacity that I was working, where it was a helping situation, and I was briefly interviewing each person. Usually anywhere from 1 minute to about 3 minutes. And this was a workshop retreat type setting that I had been doing this event on the East Coast. This is, I think, my 5th or 6th year doing this event. And some people have been coming every year. And there was a young woman who came up and she said, I have something I want to talk about, but I haven't been able to talk about before. I said, okay, well, what would you like? She says, well, I'm really anxious. I'm really anxious, and I'm really, really worried about, am I doing the right thing? I said, that's interesting, because, you know, these years that you've been coming to this event, I didn't get that sense, because you're such a warm and embracing person, and you seem to take care of other people really well. And she says, well, that's actually an act, and I'm really anxious underneath. I said, okay, well, that's okay. And then she gave me a little bit of background information to explain why she feels that, her personal background. I said, I can understand that that's, you know, the reasons why you feel that way. And I think, you know, you don't need to be so anxious, and you should just be comfortable in your own skin. And it was very interesting what happened in that moment. As I was saying that, she got all excited, and she started talking about what she was going to do that weekend after she went home. And at first, I wasn't sure what she was saying. But then suddenly I realized, I said her name, and I said, you're doing it again. And she says, yeah. She says, yeah. And I said, you know, given everything you've experienced, how you're able to carry yourself, how you're able to work with people and do the things that you do, shows great courage and great beauty in your life. And in that moment, something fell away, and she realized she doesn't have to be so anxious. She doesn't have to be so anxious. So on the one hand, at that moment, I was able not to be so caught up in the conversation that I just followed the train of her thought into the weekend. I noticed that she was putting up her defensive barriers again in that moment. But afterwards, I had to think, gee, Mark, it took you 5 years to really see that. I wasn't really seeing her for the first 4 years. I wasn't really seeing her. And there can be a ripening process. Maybe that's how much time it was supposed to take for her or for me. But in that particular context where I have a leadership role, I'm partially have a responsibility and therefore am somewhat anxious to make sure everything's going smoothly. But that might prevent me from dropping my story about the event itself. It needs to go smoothly. And really see, really listen, and notice that there's something underneath the surface going on with it. So, let's just breathe again.
I like when things are very clear. So you're saying in regards to Jenny's question to reflect inwards when trying to overcome these preconceived notions of religion. Is that kind of the story?
Right.
Okay.
So knowledge and self-knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And to see that even when we're not aware of it, are wanting to be concerned with something else, that the conversation continues, or that we don't have too much of a lull, can be a barrier to becoming aware of the subtler level of interaction and what assumptions I'm bringing in to how this particular relationship or conversation is being channeled. And that it takes a little bit of effort to let go of that and just allow whatever's going to come up to allow up. Now, I would say from the side of counseling and psychotherapy that one has to be careful when one does this, because sometimes there are unruly forces that are being held in check by maintaining one's social persona or social mask or facade. And that if you allow something deeper to emerge and there's somebody who's troubled and you're not prepared to feel whatever's going to come up, then it could be challenging. So in that regard, being well prepared, understanding the range of human experience, a certain amount of which you can acquire through learning, reading books, a certain amount that you can acquire through internships, apprenticeships, but definitely a significant amount that you can only acquire by fire and trial and error.